Hello once again. Welcome to my home kitchen here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This is Justin Johnson from Sustainable Kitchens, and this is our Back to Scratch culinary training series. In this session, we're going to be talking about different types of techniques for cooking meat, with a focus on making sure that they're as tender as possible and we're using the right technique for the right cut. Now, for home delivered meals and congregate senior dining, there's really three primary techniques that we're going to use the most. One is going to be slow roasting, one is going to be high heat roasting, and one is going to be oven braising. And so for today, we're going to be doing a beef roast, breaded chicken breast, and a braised chicken thigh, and go through all of the different techniques and the best approach to getting the most flavor and the most tenderness from these cuts. Let's go. So we're going to start by preheating our oven to 325 degrees, and this is going to be our slow roasting technique. We're going to be using a top round, but this technique works really well with top round, bottom round, pork loin, turkey, ham, rump roast, things like that. Things that need a little bit more time, have a higher fat content, and take a little bit more time and temperature to get tender. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is get a little marinade or rub going for this top round roast. So what I'm doing here is mincing some fresh rosemary, and that's going to go right into our bowl. And then I am going to add some minced garlic, and we're going to top it off with a little bit of olive oil. Now, we're not going to add any salt or Mrs. Dash to this particular marinade. We're going to use the garlic and the rosemary to do all the flavoring work for us. The most important thing when achieving tenderness in any kind of meat preparation is using the right technique for the cut, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, of course, there's a lot of things that can cause meat to be tough. It can come from undercooking, overcooking, using the wrong technique, using pre-treated meats, holding too long, over-marinating, or the quality of the meat itself. Now, once we have our meat rubbed and marinated, we're going to let it sit for about 30 minutes or so before we slide it into the oven at 325 degrees, uncovered, and we're going to let that roast for about an hour. Now we are going to move to our oven braising technique. Now, proteins that work really well with this technique would be chicken thighs, chicken legs, short ribs, pork shoulder, bottom round. But before we do anything with the meat, we have to make our braising liquid. For this preparation, we're going to use the SK brown sauce base. Now, we'll get more into depth on all of these different kinds of sauces in our sauce making session. But for this, we're going to just start by dicing up some onions. Now, in preparing meals for seniors, from time to time, we might hear that the meat is tough. Sometimes it means it's chewy, which means it's undercooked. Sometimes it means it's dry, which means it's overcooked. Meat often passes through the windows of toughness and tenderness more than once during the cooking process. For tips on how to hold a knife and the best ways to cut an onion or other vegetables, refer back to session 1 on knife skills of this training series. We're going to arrange our boneless chicken thighs here in a pan. Make sure that they're well spaced out. We're going to season it with some Mrs. Dash, and then we're going to start making our braising liquid. We're going to put some olive oil in a pan on the stove. We're going to add our diced onions, a little bit of Mrs. Dash to that mixture as well, and then we're going to add some roasted garlic and allow that to saute and let the onions get translucent. Now, at your meal sites, you'll be wanting to make a larger quantity. So instead of doing it in a shallow saute pan, you'll do it in a large kettle. But the same technique applies. You're going to heat oil in your kettle, and you're going to add your onions, your garlic, or whatever other aromatics you need. Next, we're going to add our tomato paste, and this is going to give the sauce some body, it's going to give it some color, and it's going to help those onions and the garlic to brown. Now, once our onions and garlic have cooked, we're going to add our chicken stock, and that is what's going to turn it into our braising liquid. We're going to whisk that together to pull up some of those brown bits or that fond that has cooked on the bottom of the pan. allow that tomato paste to melt, which will give it some thickness. Now on your meal sites, you're going to be doing the exact same process, except just adding it in bigger volumes. Now we're just going to let that sauce kind of simmer for a little bit, which will allow it to reduce and thicken up slightly. Then we're just going to pour it right over the top of our raw chicken thighs. Then we will wrap it tight with aluminum foil. And we will slide it right into the oven, also at 325 degrees. For 45 minutes. Now lastly, we will do our high heat roasting. But before we deal with the meat, we're going to make a breading. We're going to be doing that with 2 cups of panko breadcrumb, a half cup of grated Parmesan cheese, and 2 tablespoons of dried basil. Then we will give it a pulse in our food processor. If you don't have a food processor, you can do this in a blender as well. The idea is to get this to the consistency of like a coarse ground sand. Now we're going to take our chicken breasts and we're going to bread them in our panko and Parmesan mixture. Now, high heat roasting is best used for chicken breast, fish, steak, pork tenderloin, or pork chops, things that are a lot more lean and have a lower fat content and can be cooked very quickly at very high heat. So now we will increase our oven temp to 425 degrees and slide in those chicken breasts and roast those for 20 minutes. At this point, we can pull our top round roast out of the oven and allow it to rest. Now ideally you want it to rest for about 30 minutes before you start to slice into it to enable the juices to reconstitute. In many cases at meal sites, when doing this type of preparation, folks will actually cool these roasts overnight and then slice them on a slicer the next day. And it is perfectly fine to do it that way. And in fact, it's probably preferable when you're roasting meat at a much higher volume. Now, as you can see, what we have here is really just a perfect medium. And we're going to transfer these slices into our pan, and then we are going to pour our brown sauce base right over the top of that. Now, the sauce is going to continue to cook the meat. So the real advantage of having this being done at a medium is knowing that a lot of times our food has to be held, it has to travel, and the meat will be able to take on the heat of that sauce without getting dried out or overcooked. Now at this point we can take out our chicken breasts and our chicken thighs and see how we did. Now we can see here that our slow roasted beef top round is soft and tender to the touch. We can always spoon out some of that sauce that it's been cooked in. Over here we can see our breaded chicken breast is fully cooked, but also nice and tender, and we can actually see the juices coming right out of there. And lastly, we have our boneless braised chicken thighs, and those should come apart really easily with just a couple of forks, and we can see how nice and tender those are as well. And we can always use that braising liquid as a sauce to top on there as well. In preparing a high volume of meals to be packaged and delivered, achieving tenderness in meat is as important as it is challenging. I hope these techniques were beneficial, and happy cooking.